Get your hands off the steering wheel and step out of the vehicle, now." Officer Brandon Clark barked, his hand resting menacingly on the butt of his service weapon. The flashing red and blue light sliced through the midnight fog at the Chevron station. "Officer, I have done nothing wrong. I am simply pumping gas," the man replied, his voice a low, steady rumble of authority that defied the cold steel handcuffs waiting for him. "I don't care who you think you are," Clark sneered, slamming the man against the hood of the car. "You're going to jail." He had no idea he just brutalized and arrested the newly appointed district judge, presiding over his career-making case the very next morning. The digital clock on the dashboard of the 2024 Mercedes-Benz S580 read 1:14 a.m. Leon Washington exhaled a long, heavy breath, feeling the deep, ambient rumble of the engine vibrating through the leather steering wheel. He was 52 years old, his hair peppered with distinguished silver at the temples, wearing a tailored charcoal cashmere sweater that cost more than most people made in a week. But tonight, he didn't feel like a man of status. He just felt bone-tired. He had spent the last 3 days at a grueling judicial symposium in Atlanta, navigating the complex labyrinths of constitutional law, appellate jurisdictions, and the ever-shifting landscape of criminal justice reform. His flight back to Florida had been delayed by 4 hours due to a massive thunderstorm system over the Atlantic. Now, all he wanted was to reach his home in the quiet, affluent suburbs of West Palm Beach, pour himself 2 fingers of Macallan 18, and sleep for a day straight. But the Mercedes was running on fumes. The low fuel indicator had been glowing a menacing amber for the last 20 miles. Leon guided the sleek, midnight blue sedan off the Interstate 95 exit ramp, the tires humming softly against the asphalt. He spotted the glowing blue and red halo of a Chevron station piercing the humid Florida night. The station was desolate, bathed in the harsh, sterile glare of fluorescent canopy lights. Moths fluttered erratically around the glowing bulbs. He pulled up to pump number 4, cut the engine, and stepped out. The thick, humid air of the Florida summer hit him instantly, carrying the faint, pungent scent of unleaded gasoline and distant ocean salt. He swiped his platinum credit card, selected the premium grade, and stood by the rear quarter panel, watching the digital numbers spin upward. He checked his wrist, a silver Rolex Submariner date, gleaming under the harsh canopy lights, and sighed. Just 10 more minutes, and he would be home. That was when the predatory growl of a V8 engine shattered the midnight silence. A local police cruiser, its headlights off but running lights glowing like predatory eyes, crept into the Chevron parking lot. It didn't pull up to the convenience store. Instead, it slowly circled the perimeter of the lot, its tires crunching over discarded plastic cups and gravel. Inside the cruiser sat Officer Brandon Clark. At 31, Clark was a man who wore his badge not as a shield to protect the public, but as a heavy crown. He was broad-shouldered, with a tight military fade haircut and a jawline set in a perpetual, arrogant clench. In his 5 years on the force, Clark had built a reputation for being aggressive, unrelenting, and dangerously loose with the constitutional rights of the citizens he policed. Beside him sat Officer David Miller, a 22-year-old rookie whose idealism hadn't yet been crushed by the cynical reality of the streets. "Look at this guy," Clark muttered, tapping his thick fingers against the steering wheel. He squinted through the windshield at Leon, midnight blue S-Class. "Out here at 1 in the morning. Doesn't fit the profile for this zip code." "He's just pumping gas, Brandon," Miller said nervously, adjusting his heavy-duty belt. "Car's got clean tags. Probably just a guy coming home late." "You're naive, kid," Clark scoffed, his eyes narrowing into slits. "A guy who looks like that, driving a $130,000 car at this hour? I smell a drug runner. Or a stolen vehicle. We're gonna light him up." Before Miller could protest, Clark slammed his palm down on the control panel. The silence of the gas station was violently obliterated. Blinding red and blue strobe lights erupted from the cruiser's light bar, bouncing violently off the white canopy and the polished paint of Leon's Mercedes. A quick, deafening blast of the air horn made Leon flinch, his hand gripping the gas nozzle tight. The cruiser accelerated sharply, braking hard and angling itself aggressively to block the Mercedes from pulling forward. The spotlight mounted on the cruiser's A-pillar flicked on, sending a blinding, concentrated beam of white heat directly into Leon's eyes. Leon raised a hand to shield his face, squinting through the glare. He felt a familiar, cold knot tighten in his stomach. It was a feeling he hadn't experienced in decades, not since he was a young law student driving a beat-up Honda. It was the feeling of being hunted simply for existing. "Step away from the vehicle and keep your hands where I can see them," a voice boomed over the cruiser's PA system, dripping with aggressive authority. Leon calmly placed the gas nozzle back onto the pump. He did not panic. He did not make sudden movements. He possessed a mind trained in the rigorous logic of the law, and he knew exactly how these encounters could spiral into tragedy. He took one deliberate step away from his car, keeping his hands empty and visible at his waist. The doors of the cruiser swung open. Officer Clark stepped out, his hand resting heavily on the grip of his Glock 19. He moved with a swaggering, confrontational gait, closing the distance between them with purposeful intimidation. "Is there a problem, officer?" Leon asked. His voice was steady, deep, and completely devoid of fear. It was a voice used to commanding courtrooms, not begging for mercy on the asphalt. "I'll be the one asking the questions," Clark snapped, stopping just 3 feet away, invading Leon's personal space. He shined a heavy tactical flashlight directly into Leon's eyes. "License, registration, and proof of insurance." Now, Leon did not reach for his pockets immediately. He knew the sudden movement could be deliberately misconstrued as a threat. Instead, he maintained his calm, unyielding posture. "My wallet is in my right back pocket," Leon stated clearly, his baritone voice cutting through the hum of the gas station lights. "My registration and insurance are in the glove compartment. I will need to reach into the vehicle to retrieve them. Do I have your permission to do so?" Officer Clark's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to suspects speaking to him with such articulate precision. He was used to fear. He was used to stuttering, to compliance, to submission. Leon's calm demeanor felt, to Clark, like an intolerable challenge to his authority. "Just get the damn ID," Clark barked. Leon moved slowly, pulling his leather wallet from his back pocket. He extracted his driver's license, which simply read Leon Washington, and handed it over. Clark snatched the plastic card, shining his flashlight on it, then back at Leon's face. "Whose car is this, Leon?" "It is my vehicle," Leon replied. "Is that right?" Clark smirked, a cruel, mocking expression twisting his features. "You expect me to believe you can afford a brand new S-Class? What do you do for a living, Leon? Sell pharmaceuticals on the street corner?" The racist implication hung heavy and toxic in the humid air. Officer Miller, standing a few paces back near the trunk of the Mercedes, shifted uncomfortably. "Brandon," Miller whispered, "the plates come back clean. Registered to him. No warrants." "Shut up, Miller," Clark snapped without looking back. He turned his aggressive focus back to Leon. "I'm going to need to search this vehicle. Step aside." Clark moved to grab the driver's side door handle. Instinctively, but calmly, Leon shifted his weight, placing his body directly between the police officer and the door. "No, officer," Leon said. The word was not a plea. It was a judicial ruling delivered on the pavement. "You do not have my consent to search this vehicle." Clark stopped dead in his tracks. The silence that followed was deafening, save for the rhythmic clicking of the gas pump. Clark's face flushed a deep, angry crimson. The veins in his thick neck began to pulse. "Excuse me?" Clark growled, leaning in so close that Leon could smell the stale coffee and wintergreen mints on his breath. "Did you just tell me no?" "I did," Leon replied, his gaze locked dead onto Clark's eyes. "Under the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution, you require either a warrant, probable cause, or my explicit consent to search my private property. You have none of the three. You initiated a traffic stop on a parked vehicle without reasonable, articulable suspicion of a crime, which violates the precedent set in Terry v. Ohio. Now, if you are not going to issue me a citation, I am asking if I am free to leave." For a split second, Clark's brain short-circuited. He had never had a suspect, quote, Supreme Court case law to his face in the middle of the night. But instead of realizing he was out of his depth, Clark's fragile ego ignited into pure, uncontrolled rage. "You think you're a smart guy, huh?" Clark yelled, the spit flying from his lips. You think because you know a couple of fancy words you can disrespect a sworn officer of the law? I am stating my rights, Leon said, unwavering. Here are your rights, Clark roared. Without warning, Clark lunged forward. He grabbed Leon roughly by the lapels of his expensive cashmere sweater and violently spun him around. The side of Leon's face was slammed hard against the cold, polished glass of the Mercedes window. The impact sent a shockwave of pain through Leon's jaw. Brandon, what are you doing? Officer Miller shouted, taking a panicked step forward. He's resisting, Clark yelled, though Leon was doing absolutely nothing of the sort. Leon's hands were splayed flat against the glass of his own car, his body entirely compliant despite the unlawful assault. Clark kicked Leon's legs apart with a heavy combat boot, nearly knocking the older man to the ground. He wrenched Leon's arms behind his back with unnecessary, brutal force, twisting the shoulder joint to the absolute brink of dislocation. The cold, heavy steel of the Smith & Wesson handcuffs bit viciously into Leon's wrists. The ratchets clicked loudly, a harsh, metallic sound of finality in the quiet night. Clark clamped them down so tight they instantly cut off the circulation to Leon's hands. You are making a profound and life-altering mistake, officer, Leon said quietly, his cheek pressed against the glass. He didn't yell. He didn't swear. He merely stated a fact. The only one who made a mistake is you, thinking you could mouth off to me, Clark sneered, patting Leon down with rough, invasive hands. You're under arrest for disorderly conduct, obstruction of justice, and resisting arrest. Let's see how much you like quoting the Constitution from a holding cell. Clark grabbed the chain of the handcuffs and shoved Leon forward, marching him toward the back of the cruiser like a trophy. As Leon was shoved forcefully into the hard plastic back seat of the patrol car, the heavy door slammed shut, sealing him in the suffocating, stale air of the cage. Through the wire mesh, Leon watched as Clark high-fived the air, turning to a pale and terrified Officer Miller. That's how you handle these guys, rookie, Clark boasted loudly. You show 'em who owns the streets. Leon sat in the dark, the pain radiating up his arms, the tight cuffs slicing into his skin. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and let the cold, hard reality of the moment settle in. The irony was so thick it was suffocating. He didn't say another word the entire ride to the precinct. He didn't need to. Tomorrow morning, he would be doing all the talking. The processing area of the West Palm Beach County precinct smelled of bleach, stale sweat, and despair. It was a cacophony of ringing phones, shouting deputies, and the muffled weeping of people whose lives had just been derailed. Leon Washington was dragged through the double doors by a triumphant Officer Clark, who paraded him past the front desk like a prized buck brought back from a hunt. Got a live one tonight, Sarge, Clark announced loudly to the overweight desk sergeant, slamming Leon's platinum credit cards, Rolex watch, and driver's license onto the metal counter. Thinks he's F. Lee Bailey. Refused a lawful order, resisted arrest. Needs to spend the night on the concrete to cool off. The desk sergeant barely looked up from his computer monitor. He grabbed Leon's license and began typing the name into the system. Leon Washington. All right, take his shoelaces and belt, put him in cell block 3. We'll arraign him in the morning. Wait. Officer Miller chimed in, stepping forward nervously. Sarge, look at his ID again. The address. And the system. Doesn't it flag something? Clark shoved Miller aside. Don't be a coward, Dave. He's nobody. Leon remained entirely silent. He submitted to the humiliating process without a single word of protest. He let them take his belt. He let them take the shoelaces from his Italian leather loafers. He let them roll his fingers in the black ink, pressing them onto the paper cards. He stood against the white cinder block wall, staring blankly into the camera lens as the harsh flash of the mugshot blinded him. Every indignity was a mental note. Every violation of protocol was being filed away in his encyclopedic legal mind. Finally, a heavy iron door clanged open, and Leon was shoved into holding cell number 3. The cell was an 8x10 concrete box. The only furniture was a steel bench bolted to the wall and a stainless steel toilet in the corner that reeked of ammonia. There were 3 other men in the cell, 2 sleeping off alcohol, and 1 staring vacantly at the ceiling. Leon walked to the far corner, sat down on the freezing steel bench, and folded his hands in his lap. The skin around his wrists was bruised a deep, angry purple, swollen and throbbing from the overly tight handcuffs. He leaned his head back against the cold, damp cinderblock wall and closed his eyes. In the darkness behind his eyelids, Leon didn't feel anger. He felt a profound, overwhelming sadness. He had dedicated his entire adult life to the pursuit of justice. He had graduated top of his class at Harvard Law. He had spent 15 years as a relentless federal prosecutor, taking down organized crime rings and corrupt politicians. For the past decade, he had served as an appellate judge, known for his piercing intellect and unwavering fairness. Just 3 days ago, the governor had appointed him to the district court, specifically tasking him with cleaning up the backlog of high-profile felony cases in this very county. He was a pillar of the legal community, a man who held the power to strip away a person's freedom or return it to them. And yet, none of that mattered to Officer Brandon Clark. To Clark, Leon was just a black man in an expensive car late at night. All his degrees, his accolades, his power, they were entirely invisible in the shadows of the Chevron gas station. The badge on Clark's chest had acted as a shield for his prejudice, allowing him to bypass the law he swore to uphold. "Hey, new guy," a raspy voice called out. It was the man staring at the ceiling. "You get your phone call yet?" Leon opened his eyes. "No, not yet. Gotta ask for it. They won't just offer it. Bastards." An hour later, a deputy banged his nightstick against the iron bars. "Washington, phone call. Make it quick." Leon was escorted to a wall-mounted telephone in the hallway. He picked up the heavy plastic receiver. He didn't dial a high-powered defense attorney. He didn't dial a bail bondsman. He dialed the private cell phone number of Mrs. Higgins, his chief judicial clerk of 15 years. It rang 3 times before she answered, her voice groggy. "Judge Washington?" she asked, confusion lacing her tone. "It's 3 in the morning. Is everything all right?" "Martha, I apologize for waking you," Leon said, his voice smooth and steady. "I have encountered a minor, logistical delay on my journey home. Are you hurt, sir? Do you need me to call someone?" "No, Martha. I am perfectly fine," Leon replied, staring through the glass at Officer Clark, who was laughing by the coffee machine in the break room, pantomiming the arrest to a group of other cops. "I am currently calling you from the West Palm Beach County holding facility." There was a dead silence on the line. Then, a sharp intake of breath. "Judge, what happened?" "A misunderstanding regarding the Fourth Amendment," Leon said dryly. "I will be released in a few hours on my own recognizance. I am calling to give you instructions for tomorrow's docket." "Yes, Judge. Of course. What do you need?" "I will be arriving directly to the courthouse at 8:30. Please ensure my robes are pressed and ready in chambers." "And Martha?" "Yes, sir. Do not mention a word of this to anyone. I want the morning proceedings to go exactly as scheduled, especially the suppression hearing at 9 o'clock. The state versus Martinez." "Understood, Judge." Leon hung up the phone. He was escorted back to his cold concrete cell. He didn't sleep. He spent the next 4 hours sitting in the dark, mentally drafting the most important legal ruling he would ever deliver. At 7 a.m., the cell door unlocked. The morning shift commander had run the daily bail reports. When he saw the name, the occupation, and the bar number attached to Leon Washington, the blood had drained from the commander's face. Leon was released on zero bail, his belongings hastily shoved back into his hands by a pale, trembling deputy who couldn't meet his eyes. Leon walked out of the precinct into the blinding morning Florida sun. He retrieved his Mercedes from the impound lot, the sting in his wrists a constant, pulsing reminder of the night before. He drove home, showered the smell of the jail cell off his body, put on a fresh, immaculately tailored dark blue suit, and drove toward the county courthouse. The hammer was about to fall. At 8 a.m., Officer Brandon Clark stood in the locker room of the precinct, admiring his reflection in the full-length mirror. He was wearing his Class A dress uniform. The brass buttons were polished to a mirror shine, the creases in his dark blue trousers were sharp enough to cut paper, and his leather duty belt squeaked softly with every movement. Today was a massive day for his career. Today was the evidence suppression hearing for the Martinez cartel bust. 3 months ago, Clark had pulled over a van on a routine traffic stop, claimed he smelled marijuana, searched the vehicle without a warrant, and found 40 kilos of pure cocaine hidden in the floorboards. It was the biggest drug bust the precinct had seen in a decade. If the judge upheld the search today, the cartel members were going away for life, and Clark was guaranteed his golden detective shield. "You ready for this, man?" asked Officer Miller, who was adjusting his own tie nervously. Miller looked exhausted, dark bags under his eyes from the midnight shift. "Born ready, kid," Clark grinned, adjusting his collar. "We got a slam dunk. The ADA said the defense is going to try to throw out the search, claim I didn't have probable cause. But all I gotta do is get up on that stand, look the judge in the eye, and say the magic words. I smelled contraband, Your Honor. Case closed." "I don't know, Brandon," Miller said, his voice tight. "I heard the new judge they assigned to the felony docket is a hard-ass. Former Fed. A real stickler for the Constitution. They say he eats sloppy cops for breakfast." "Let him try," Clark scoffed, grabbing his uniform hat. "I've testified 100 times. Judges always side with the badge. It's an unwritten rule. We protect the streets, they protect us. Now come on, let's go put some scumbags behind bars." Clark swaggered out of the locker room, feeling 10 feet tall. He had completely forgotten about the black man he had assaulted and arrested at the gas station just 7 hours prior. To Clark, that man was garbage, already processed through the system, a meaningless statistic in his daily grind. They drove to the West Palm Beach County Courthouse, a massive, imposing structure of white marble and towering Doric columns. The halls were bustling with lawyers in sharp suits, crying family members, and police officers milling about. Clark pushed through the heavy mahogany double doors of courtroom 4B. The gallery was packed. News reporters sat in the back row, sketch pads and notepads ready. At the defense table sat Alejandro Martinez, flanked by his two high-priced, vicious defense attorneys, Sarah Jenkins and Michael Vance. At the prosecution table sat the assistant district attorney, a nervous-looking young man who wiped sweat from his brow. Clark strode past the wooden barrier, giving the defense attorneys a cocky, dismissive smirk. He took a seat in the front row right behind the prosecution table, leaning back and crossing his arms. He owned this room. "Bailiff, are we ready?" the court clerk asked. The heavy-set bailiff nodded, stepping to the center of the room. The digital clock on the wood-paneled wall clicked to exactly 9 a.m. "All rise," the bailiff's voice boomed, echoing off the high ceilings. Every person in the courtroom stood to their feet. The rustling of papers and murmuring died instantly, replaced by a heavy, expectant silence. The District Court of West Palm Beach County is now in session. The Honorable Judge Leon Washington presiding. God save the state and this honorable court. The heavy oak door behind the judge's bench swung open. Judge Leon Washington stepped out from his chambers. He moved with a slow, deliberate grace, his long black judicial robes flowing around him like a shadow. He climbed the 3 carpeted steps to the elevated bench, standing tall before the leather chair. He did not immediately sit down. Instead, he stood there, his hands resting flat on the mahogany desk, and let his eyes slowly pan across the entire courtroom. He looked at the defense table, he looked at the prosecution, and then his gaze locked dead onto the first row of the gallery. Officer Brandon Clark was standing at attention, his hat tucked under his arm. But as he looked up at the man standing behind the bench, a bizarre, terrifying cognitive dissonance shattered his brain. Clark blinked. He blinked again, hard. It couldn't be. The man in the black robes, the Honorable Judge Leon Washington, had the same salt and pepper hair, the same piercing, intelligent brown eyes, the same broad, authoritative shoulders. It was the man from the Chevron station, the man he had illegally searched, the man he had slammed against the glass of a Mercedes-Benz, the man whose wrists he had crushed with handcuffs just 7 hours ago. All the blood instantly drained from Officer Clark's face, leaving him as pale as a corpse. His stomach violently plummeted, as if the floor of the courthouse had just dropped out from beneath him. A cold, prickling sweat erupted across his forehead and down his spine. His knees suddenly felt like they were made of water. Beside him, Officer Miller let out a microscopic gasp. Miller had recognized him instantly. The rookie turned to look at Clark, his eyes wide with absolute, unadulterated terror. Leon Washington stared directly at Officer Clark for 5 agonizingly long seconds. The judge's face was a mask of cold, impenetrable stone. There was no smirk. There was no glimmer of vengeance. There was only the terrifying, crushing weight of absolute authority. "Be seated," Judge Washington finally said, his deep baritone voice rumbling through the courtroom microphones. The gallery sat down in unison. Clark collapsed into his wooden chair, his legs barely supporting him. His heart was hammering against his ribs so hard he thought it might crack his sternum. He couldn't breathe. The air in the courtroom suddenly felt as thick as wet concrete. Calling docket number 44-092, the state of Florida versus Alejandro Martinez, Judge Washington announced, opening the thick manila file in front of him. This is an evidentiary hearing regarding the defense's motion to suppress physical evidence gathered during a traffic stop on April 14th. Is the state ready to proceed? "Ready, Your Honor," the young atta squeaked, standing up. "Is the defense ready?" "Ready, Your Honor," Attorney Sarah Jenkins said smoothly. "Very well," Judge Washington said, intertwining his fingers and resting his chin on them. He looked down directly at the prosecution table, but his eyes were fixed on the man sitting right behind it. "The state may call its first witness." The ADA turned around and gestured to Clark. "The state calls Officer Brandon Clark to the stand." Clark felt his soul leave his body. He couldn't move. He sat frozen in the pew, staring blankly at the judge. "Officer Clark?" the ADA whispered, looking confused. Miller violently elbowed Clark in the ribs. Clark jolted awake from his terror-induced trance. He swallowed hard, his throat feeling like it was lined with sandpaper. He stood up, his legs shaking violently, and walked toward the witness box. Every step felt like he was walking to his own execution. He raised his right hand. The bailiff held out a Bible. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?" Clark looked at the Bible, then looked up at Judge Washington, who was staring down at him with eyes like twin black holes. I do," Clark choked out, his voice cracking pathetically. He sat down in the wooden witness chair. It felt like an electric chair. "Proceed, Counselor," Judge Washington commanded softly. The ADA approached the podium. "Officer Clark, could you please detail the events of the night of April 14th regarding the defendant, Mr. Martinez?" Clark gripped the edges of the wooden witness stand. His palms were sweating so profusely they slipped against the varnish. He tried to remember the script he had rehearsed 100 times in his head, but his brain was completely offline, paralyzed by the predator sitting just 3 feet to his left. I initiated a traffic stop on a white cargo van," Clark stammered, staring fixedly at the back wall of the courtroom, terrified to look at the judge. "The vehicle. It crossed the double yellow line. I approached the driver's side window." "And what happened next, officer?" The ADA prompted gently. I asked for license and registration, and then," Clark swallowed hard, "I smelled the odor of unburnt marijuana emanating from the vehicle. And based on that odor, which provides probable cause in the state of Florida, you conducted a search of the vehicle?" "Yes," Clark whispered. "And what did you find?" 40 kilograms of cocaine hidden in a false floorboard." "Thank you, officer. No further questions." The ADA sat down, looking pleased. Judge Washington turned his head slowly toward the defense table. "Counselor Jenkins, your witness." Sarah Jenkins stood up, holding a yellow legal pad. She walked to the center of the room. She was a shark, and there was blood in the water. "Officer Clark," Jenkins began, her voice dripping with skepticism. "You claim you smelled unburnt marijuana through a cracked window from a van driving on a highway, over the smell of exhaust fumes?" "Yes, ma'am," Clark lied, his voice trembling. "Isn't it true, Officer Clark, that you have a documented history of conducting searches without a warrant?" Jenkins asked, flipping a page. "Isn't it true that you frequently use the smell of marijuana as a blanket excuse to bypass the Fourth Amendment rights of citizens in this county?" Objection. Badgering the witness, the ADA stood up. Overruled, Judge Washington snapped instantly, his voice echoing like a gunshot. "The witness's credibility regarding search and seizure is the crux of this entire hearing. He will answer the question." Clark looked at the judge. He saw the purple bruising peeking out from under the cuff of the judge's white dress shirt, the exact spot where Clark's handcuffs had dug into Leon's flesh hours ago. Clark felt bile rise in his throat. I follow the law, Clark stammered. Do you, Officer Clark? Judge Washington suddenly interjected. The entire courtroom froze. It is highly unusual for a judge to directly cross-examine a witness. When they do, it means something has gone terribly, horribly wrong for the person in the hot seat. Judge Washington leaned forward, removing his reading glasses. He pinned Clark to the chair with a stare so intensely cold it could have frozen boiling water. Let us discuss your understanding of the law, Officer Clark, Judge Washington said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble. Are you familiar with the precedent established in Florida v. Gimeno regarding consent to search? I believe so, Your Honor, Clark whispered. And are you familiar with Terry v. Ohio, which clearly states that an officer must have reasonable, articulable suspicion that a crime has been, is being, or is about to be committed to justify an investigatory stop? Yes, Your Honor. Good, Judge Washington said softly. Then you are aware that a police badge is not a skeleton key to the private property of American citizens. You are aware that you cannot simply approach a citizen who is, say, minding their own business while pumping gas, and demand to search their property simply because you feel, what is the word, disrespected? The color vanished completely from the ADA's face. He looked frantically between the judge and his star witness, having no idea what was happening, but knowing it was catastrophic. Clark began to physically tremble in the chair. Your Honor, Did you feel disrespected by the driver of the van, Officer Clark? Judge Washington pressed, his voice rising in volume and power, filling every corner of the room. Did he refuse an unlawful search? And did you respond to his assertion of his constitutional rights with physical violence? Did you slam him against his vehicle? Did you place handcuffs on him so tightly as to cause physical injury, simply because your fragile ego could not handle a citizen who knew the law better than you do? Your Honor, what is the relevance of this? The ADA pleaded, standing up, completely bewildered. Sit down, counselor. Judge Washington roared, slamming his open palm flat against the mahogany desk. The sound cracked like a whip. The ADA dropped back into his chair, as if he'd been shot. The judge turned his furious, righteous gaze back to the trembling cop. Officer Clark, Judge Washington said, his voice now a deadly whisper. I am going to ask you a question, and I remind you that you are under penalty of perjury. Is it your standard operating procedure to fabricate probable cause to justify your illegal searches? Clark looked around the room. Everyone was staring at him. He looked at his partner, Miller, who had buried his face in his hands. He looked at the judge, realizing with absolute certainty that his career was over. The man he had treated like garbage held his entire life in his hands. No, Your Honor, Clark squeaked. Liar, Judge Washington stated bluntly, the word hanging in the silent air. The judge picked up his gavel. He didn't bang it. He held it in his hand, looking down at the defense table. Based on the testimony provided, and this court's severe, first-hand doubts regarding the credibility, integrity, and constitutional compliance of the arresting officer, the defense's motion to suppress the evidence is hereby granted. The courtroom erupted. The defense attorneys hugged their client. The ADA dropped his head onto the table. But Judge Washington wasn't finished. He raised his hand, and the room instantly silenced again. Furthermore, Judge Washington announced, his eyes locking onto Clark like laser sights. This court is ordering the immediate release of the transcripts of this hearing. I am personally forwarding them to the Chief of Police, the Internal Affairs Bureau, and the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. I am requesting a full, retroactive investigation into every single arrest ever made by Officer Brandon Clark to determine how many other citizens have been falsely imprisoned, brutalized, and stripped of their constitutional rights by a man who uses his badge as a weapon of intimidation. Clark gripped his chest. He felt like he couldn't breathe. The walls of the courtroom were spinning. A police officer is entrusted with the greatest power a society can bestow, the power to take away a person's freedom, Judge Washington said, his voice ringing with absolute, unyielding justice. When that power is abused, it rots the very foundation of our justice system. Officer Clark, you are a disgrace to that uniform. Get out of my courtroom. Clark stumbled out of the witness box. He didn't walk. He practically fell out of it. He staggered down the aisle, the eyes of every reporter, lawyer, and civilian burning holes into his back. He pushed through the heavy oak doors, stepping out into the hallway, his career, his reputation, and his freedom completely destroyed in a matter of 10 minutes. Inside the courtroom, Judge Leon Washington adjusted his robes, ensuring the purple bruises on his wrists were covered. He picked up his pen, opened the next file, and looked out over his courtroom. Call the next case. Karma has a funny way of making sure the scales of justice always balance out. Officer Brandon Clark thought his badge made him a king, giving him the right to abuse, harass, and illegally profile innocent people without consequence. But he made the ultimate mistake of underestimating the very man he targeted, learning the hard way that true power doesn't come from a gun or handcuffs, it comes from the law, and from those who have the wisdom and authority to wield it righteously. Judge Washington didn't just serve justice that day. He dismantled a corrupt cop's entire life with nothing but the truth and the Constitution. What would you have done if you were in Judge Washington's shoes during that midnight traffic stop? Would you have stayed calm, or would you have fought back right then and there? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you love this story of instant, satisfying karma, make sure to smash that like button, share this video with anyone who loves a great twist, and hit subscribe with the notification bell turned on so you never miss out on more incredible stories like this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.